Today we talk a lot about IoT, and I was in the hotel room and watching TV last night, and this Progressive commercial comes on. I don't know if anybody's seen it. This kid walks into his kitchen and he's like, you know, trash can, turn on the lights, and you know, toaster, do this and that. And it's just kind of like the universe hitting you in the face. You know, I'm preparing for this IoT conference, and there's this commercial on TV that everybody at home is watching, and they're getting a dose of IoT without even noticing it. But really, from a security aspect, are we worried just about IoT? You know, the Internet of Things is one thing, but really as security individuals, we worry about the Internet of everything. Like a SCADA network is great, and we're looking at PLCs and looking at all these conveyor belts that are connecting to our networks, but really we have to secure everything, and that's a big task to undertake. So when we really think of Internet of everything, I mean everything. You know, we're going to talk about cars later getting hacked, and we heard airplanes getting hacked. I mean, these are realities of what we're living in today, and our jobs as security experts and individuals, we have to look at everything, and that's a challenge. So let's talk a little bit about how the business drives that. When we talk about perimeter, we always talked about that firewall on the edge, the perimeter firewall, and that was our main source coming in. But that perimeter is kind of disappearing or expanding into a scope that is unsustainable. You know, we can't say you're working from home or working from the airport or Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. We still have to secure that individual like they're in our brick and mortar shop. That's a challenge. You know, devices are being added faster than we can keep up with as humans. You know, we're going to get a little bit later to some slides, but Joey already kind of gave you a burst of my balloon, I'll say, of how many devices we're going to have on the network by 2020. It's ludicrous, and to think that a person can keep up with that is illogical. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And of course, when we're talking to higher ups or C-levels, it's just supposed to work. We can't go there and try to tell them why security is breaking. They want to just come in and know they're secure, and that's a challenge in and of itself. And when we look at security today, we talk about security experts being in silos, and today that's just not the case. We have to secure everything. We have to bleed into all silos. So really having security sit off to the side and just make recommendations to other team really isn't going to work in the future. We've been talking about the idea of DevOps for some time, developers and operations working together, breaking down these silos. Let's talk about SecOps. Let's talk about security and operations working together and breaking those silos down. So when I ask who is security today, that should be a question for everybody and say, well, I'm all security. Like, I have to think about it in my job no matter where I sit. And that's critical to businesses. But also, what about consumer drivers? This is interesting in itself. When we have new people coming into the organization, what do they expect? And how is that a security threat? So when we start talking about at-home tools, you know, we start talking about IoT. IoT at home is a big thing. We talk about like people on their phone doing Snapchat, and they think, oh, when I take a picture and send it somewhere, it gets deleted and nobody can ever find it. Well, we've proven that's not the case, right? So, you know, is my data protected? Sure, it's protected, but not really. So these are all things that at-home users coming into your organization already have expectations are going to work. And they say, my life is easier at home. Well, yeah, because you're probably trading convenience for security. And that is a very common factor in today's world. We talk about smart locks. We talk about all these great Arlo cameras and things people are putting in that are all IP-based. I bring up my app on my phone, I can look at it. Isn't it kind of weird to think that somebody else could look at that as well? You know, there are websites designed specifically for you to go out and browse and look at open IoT devices on a network. That's terrifying. It's terrifying to think that there are a lot of people that don't change default passwords at home and think they're secure. But that is kind of what we're dealing with. And I think to level set, I always say I want to stay as grounded as possible. And to be grounded, I have to understand my end users. And that's a challenge for a lot of us in the room. You know, we think it's just knowledge that everybody knows, but it's not the case. So when we look at this from a business driver and a consumer driver, we really have to take a step back and really think of who we're supporting. Because this is the reality. This is a toaster, right? But what's inside that toaster? Is it going to jump out and attack you one day? You know, from an IoT perspective, this is the reality we live in. A toaster could say, I'm not going to make your toast until you give me 5 Bitcoins that morning. Crazy thought, right? But you know, we have Samsung fridges today that will tell you you're low on milk. Okay, thanks, refrigerator. Like, it's just so weird we're talking to machines like we are today, but that's where we're going. And to Joey's point earlier, everything's going to be voice activated. We're going to walk into a room and just tell it to do something. Well, where's all that information go? Beyond the NSA, of course. But that's a whole nother topic. So when we talk about this, let's talk a little bit about some examples we have in the IOE world. And these are kind of interesting because even I trade some convenience for security at home. And Joe even put up that he has some devices in his network that, maybe they're not as secure as they can be. So imagine you go away on vacation, you set your awesome Nest thermostat to away. It's supposed to keep your house at like 55 degrees to save you some awesome money, and you get that report that says, oh, I saved all this money this month. But what happens if it gets DDoSed or hacked into and somebody says, oh, instead of away at 58 degrees, I set it away at 28 degrees. And you come home to frozen pipes. That's a bigger problem. And this actually happened in Finland to a business. They went away for a weekend. They thought they were trying to do all these money-saving techniques, and somebody hacked into the HVAC with a DDoS and took it out and took the communication out. And they came into a frozen building that shut that business down for a week. That's terrifying to me. And we're putting this everywhere. Imagine a fish tank, right? People are like, oh, fish tanks, they're cool. But how do you monitor these? How do you put sensors on them? And a casino, a higher level executive said, oh, I have this fish tank in my office. I want to put this cool sensor that tells me when I should feed my fish, what the temperature of the water is, put it on the network. Who am I as a network guy to say, no, Mr. CEO, you can't do that. Of course I'm going to put it on the network, right? So they put it on the network, and of course it gets hacked, and it's on the corporate network, and next thing you know, this fish tank sensor is exfiltrating customer data. That's pretty wild. These are real life use cases. Imagine a full internet disrupted. This happened. Mirai botnet. This is the thing that kind of opened the door to this IoT conversation. We took down DIN. I couldn't binge Netflix that day. I was furious, as many other users were. But this is the reality. This was all by IoT devices. This was by Joey's toilet, just pinging a bunch of things. That's kind of crazy to think about, that our fridges, our thermostats, that they're taking down critical network components and network infrastructure. So how are we fighting this? How are we dealing with IoE today? Well, we try to segment as best as possible. This walks through some of what Joey was talking about earlier of let's set up these VLANs and ACLs. Of course, this is all human driven. So we're trying to scale at the business speed, and we know mistakes are made, things are added, and we don't know about everything. So this in itself is insecure, but we're trying our best, right? Proper firewall rules, IPS signatures, tuning, we're doing all of that today, and it's working, but it's not working 100%. And trying to keep firmware up to date on these IoT devices, IoE devices, very challenging. Joey's point, these things aren't meant for the IP world. They were built by somebody that doesn't think like a network or security guy. They were built by people that are thinking of consumer grade or just for specific applications. And policy, we talked about risk assessment, vulnerability assessments. They're all policy, but how do we enforce policy? That's really challenging in a human world because we hear about shadow IT all the time. We hear about somebody saying, oh, it's great that you have a policy for sharing files to home, but it's a lot easier for me to just throw it on my Google Drive. Like, how do we avoid that? That's a very hard task to do, especially when we're reviewing 1 million logs a day. We're looking at 100 firewall rules and making sure they're all good. Like it's unattainable to think that a human is doing this, and it's all reactive, and that's the sticking point. Everything we do is like our hair's on fire. We always say that. We're running around just trying to keep up, and it doesn't get us ahead of the game. It just puts us a little bit further behind every time. So how do we change that in the future? Well, we got to start with proactivity. Where can we be more proactive? And that is key here. So using things like fighting machines against machine. I think, the Skynet, obviously comes to my mind. But can we build another Skynet that fights the other Skynet? Can we use machines to fight other machines so that we're not trying to keep up in the human pace? So using things like network access control tools. Using things like visibility. And visibility is so crucial to everything we talk about today. If we can't secure something, if we can't see it. And that it's a big crutch we lean on a lot of times is, oh, now we got to load up Wireshark or something and do a packet capture and try to filter through all this stuff. No, we need tools that do that for us and tell us these are things and narrow that focus and that scope down and really take a look at. Using these newer tools like security group tags that are newer in the TrustSec model at Cisco, but a lot of NAC providers are starting to do this mentality is let's tag people Let's tag users on a network. We're abstracting that idea of IPs and subnets and VLANs and saying, you know what? I'm just worried about what that user can get to. I don't care where they're at or what they're connected on. That's where we need to go. That's where we need to head, because it is not working and we can't keep up at the pace, especially when we start talking about IPv6. It blows my mind. You know, we can't do that in an IPv6 world. We're going to have to go to this kind of technology. And the big one I talk about probably on a weekly basis recently is more integrative solutions. We're not talking about going to the best of breed. To Joey's point, we can't just say, oh, let's go to Gartner and look at the upper right-hand corner and say, I'm going to buy this 50, 60 times. Well, you use 20% of that product. So is that really worthwhile of an investment? They're not talking together. They're not integrative. And now we spend all the extra time figuring out APIs and hook-ins. Why not look at a more holistic skill set, holistic tool set that we can use, that they talk to each other, they learn from? Because as we're saying, there is no way we can keep up with what's going on in our world today. So using those kind of tools and using an integrated solution is a big win to security experts, but also to businesses and how we secure them. And like I said, he burst my bubble. 50 billion devices in 2020. That's in 2 years, guys. Less than 2 years. That's a huge number to think about. And we wonder why IPv6 is driving, is a driving factor. We're talking about more and more. It's because we're running out of IPs. Aaron ran out. Things like that is insane. So what do we do to tackle this? Obviously, take steps to remediate and understand your environment. The assessments really come into play. Prepare for more automation. We have to be looking at tools and how we can better use the tools. A tool is just like a hammer and nail. It's not going to do anything just sitting there. Somebody needs to administer it and use it. But having the right tool can make your life a lot easier. I don't want to use an awl. I'd much rather use a drill. It's going to get my job done faster. It's the right tool, but I have to know how to use it. So the other big thing is being involved in your business. So I talked again about that SecOps mentality. This needs obviously to be driven top down, but they need to be educated on why this needs to be driven top down. And the big thing here is security does involve everyone. And even having security training in-house and working closer together with your teams and understanding their projects and their objectives will make you more secure just by being involved. And of course, Core BTS is here to help you guys. We have 3 great people up on stage. We have a whole team behind us. If you need help, please reach out. We love coming and talking to you guys and trying our best to educate you and get you more secure just through that mentality.